Hi everyone, this is Bloody Spartan 87, and in this video I'm gonna talk about what I think of the new God of War. So this is basically my review of that game. I know it's kind of very late, but I've been very busy for the past few months and I didn't have enough time to make a review. And I also wanted to make a retrospective review because I didn't want to review the game while I was still under my initial impression. So, I'm gonna try to make this review as comprehensive, honest, and objective as possible. I want to let you guys know that this is actually my very first review of anything, so I'll be looking forward to seeing what you think in the comments section below. This review is gonna contain spoilers, so if you haven't bought or finished the game, please stop watching and come back after you finished it. I'm gonna pin the specific time for each topic in the comment section, so if you feel like skipping to a certain topic, it would be easy for you without having to listen to the whole thing. But I do hope that you would listen to and enjoy all of it. Now, before getting into the review, I would like to mention a few points. First of all, as you may already know, I'm a huge fan and a dedicated player of the game. I've been playing this game for a very long time, probably since the game came out in 2005, or actually probably maybe 2 years after that. Anyway, I can't have enough of the classic ones because they're so good. If you've already seen the other videos on my channel, specifically the no upgrade runs and hidden chests, then you already know that I'm no casual player of this game. I have a lot of passion for it, and if you haven't seen the other videos, then you're more than welcome to take a look. I have almost 150 videos right now about God of War. I've even named my channel Bloody Spartan in reference to Kratos because he used to be the Bloody Spartan. I think he's not anymore. And up to this point, all my videos had been about God of War. I had to mention this because when I wanted to review the game, I didn't want anyone to think that I didn't know what I was talking about, or that I was a bad player or a newcomer to the series. I have a lot of knowledge about it and a lot of experience, and it clearly shows in my videos. Second, if you're a newcomer to the series or you've played the previous games a long time ago, I highly recommend that you go back and revisit the previous God of War games before watching this video in order to fully appreciate and understand where I'm coming from. I'm going to mention in my review a lot of points and comparisons that relate to the previous God of Wars. So if you don't know or if you don't remember what I'm talking about, then it won't make sense to you. Now, the reason I'm comparing this game to the previous ones is that I believe that the best way to assess strengths and weaknesses of any game is through comparison. And I believe this is how it should be done since it carries the same name as the previous titles. And by carrying the same name, it inherently forces the comparison since it claims to be the same product. The third and last thing I want to mention before I start this review is that this review is going to be about 75% my personal opinion of the game, along with about 25% inspired to me by other people who brought them up on maybe YouTube and other social media and made sense to me. So thank you in advance for the inspiration, whoever you might be. That's why I believe this review is gonna be one of the most comprehensive reviews out there, because it includes not only my opinion but also opinions from other people too. And I can't really emphasize this enough, but an opinion cannot be valid or invalid because it's simply feedback. You can't say this feedback is valid or that feedback is invalid because that just doesn't make any sense. If you disagree with anything I'm going to mention, then you're more than welcome to mention it in the comment section, but please keep it respectful because I will not hesitate to remove any disrespectful comments. As a side note, I'd like to let you guys know that I'm reviewing this game based on the version that I bought, which was the Stonemason Pre-Order Edition. Okay, now, with all that out of the way, let's get started with the review. First of all, let's talk about the graphics and audio. The graphics and audio were actually one of the few things that I actually liked about this game. The quality and the amount of detail that went into them were amazing, but the thing is that this was expected from a God of War game on PS4 and is not really something new to God of War. Let's say the God of War games always had good graphics compared to other games of their time, and the same goes for this one. So basically what they had to do is simply live up to the name of the title and live up to the standards of graphics today in 2018. They couldn't make the game with a quality of graphics and audio like that of God of War 3 or Ascension. So I don't know why so many people talk about it as if the developers did them a favor, when in reality they only did what they had to do because they had better equipment and better technology available now in 2018 than what was available back then. Next, let's talk about another thing I like about this game, which is no microtransactions. You will get the whole game in one purchase when you buy it. However, I can't really decide if this counts as a good thing or not, because the gaming industry in recent years has turned into a money-milking industry. They would release a game and then a season pass or DLC and then one or more editions of the same game, probably with just a few more additions. So I personally see this as abnormal behavior, because I believe that any game should be bought in one purchase. So, but this kind of behavior has become so pervasive in recent years that a lot of people, especially the newer generation of gamers, started to see it as normal. So when a game like God of War comes along and offers the whole game in one purchase, people get overwhelmed and everyone just like loses their shit. So I don't get why, because I think this is how it should be in the first place. So I don't think they're doing you a favor here either, but this is so hard to see when almost all other games has joined the money-milking industry. Next, another thing I like, which is no multiplayer. Since its release, God of War has been one of the best single-player games out there. When they included a multiplayer mode for Ascension, I think it took a lot of time, money, focus, and effort that could have been better directed at improving the single-player mode. In my opinion, that was the downfall of Ascension, unfortunately. I disagree with anyone who would say that Ascension was proof that the series was starting to get stale, because I don't think any true fan of the series would say that, because I think Ascension was not so good because the game developers got distracted by multiplayer. Because of that, I think the developers were at fault, and they're the ones who should be held responsible, not the game, which is because the game is only a product, and it definitely can be improved upon in the right hands. I really think the series would have had much more to offer because if the developers were more focused. Now, moving on to the world in this game, I would like to talk about 3 points here. The first one is that when I first started playing the game and started exploring Midgard, I was thinking to myself that the Norse world was gonna be huge because when I was exploring Midgard, I saw how big Midgard was, and I assumed that the 8 other worlds were gonna be as big as Midgard. So I imagined the Norse world was gonna be massive. But as I progressed through the game, the massive image that I imagined started getting smaller and smaller. First of all, because the other worlds were considerably smaller than Midgard, with not much to do in any of them. And second, I realized that Midgard only felt huge because of the lake in the middle. During the game, you spend most of your time on the shores around the lake, which are not very big themselves. Plus, there are 2 other worlds, I think Vanaheim and Svartalheim, that you never actually see in the game. So if we make a comparison between the Greek world and the Norse, imagine that the Greek world from the previous God of War games is an open world, just like this one, like everywhere you visited in the previous games. Then you would realize that the world of Greek mythology was a lot larger than this one. The second point I want to bring up about the world is that it felt dead because there were no people in it. The only people you meet other than the dwarves were the cannibals, and that's it. We already know that Kratos moved to Scandinavia in this game, but that does not explain why the world there is so empty when Europe and Greece and probably a lot of the world was heavily populated. I remember before the game was released, the developer said that the game was gonna be, and I quote, during a time when gods walked the earth. And what they meant by that was that at some point in history, the Vikings believed that the gods actually or literally walked the earth. But if you think of it, that doesn't mean that there were no people who lived before the Vikings in Scandinavia, because certainly the Vikings were not the first people who lived in that area. So the lack of life in this game caused it to be very dull and boring. In the previous games, you could see people wherever you went, in Athens, in Mount Olympus, in Atlantis, Sparta, or Rhodes. There were even people in Hades, like that guy who loved Persephone, and even that half-dead guy on Pandora's Temple, the one who burned the people who died inside the temple. That guy made the empty temple feel more alive than this game ever did. The third point I would like to talk about regarding the world in this game is the lack of large-scale, visually impressive concepts. Now, don't get me wrong, the world was beautifully made. The forests, caves, mountains, and scenery were all beautiful, but I think they were not impressive. What I mean by impressive concepts is something like Pandora's Temple in God of War 1, the Steeds of Time, and also the Temple of the Fates in God of War 2, and the huge labyrinth with all its complex mechanics in God of War 3. And even Ascension had impressive concepts, like the place where you start, which was an entire city with all its streets and buildings. It was built on top of the giant Hecatoncheires. The things I just mentioned were not only visually impressive, but each one also had a unique story behind it. Unfortunately, the new God of War had nothing like that. I don't claim to be an artist or anything like that, but an impressive concept for this world would be, for example, something like the Yggdrasil tree being physically present in the middle of the big lake. I think that would have been impressive, but that's just one example that I came up with, and I'm sure that there are many other examples that the developers could have used for the game. By the way, the actual Norse mythology in the actual Norse mythology, a dragon lives at the base of the Yggdrasil tree, and a huge eagle lives on top of the tree. I actually looked this up on Wikipedia. So I don't know how correct or accurate this information is. It said that the eagle is or was so big that a hawk could stand between its eyes, and it was thought or believed that the hawk brought news to the eagle from around the world. There are also four stags that live on the tree, and a squirrel named Ratatosk, which is actually the name of the squirrel that Boy summons in the game. It's one of the summons if you check it. And this squirrel goes back and forth between the eagle and dragon, telling lies to both of them to turn them against each other. And finally, the world serpent wraps itself around the roots of the tree. Now imagine how cool and impressive it could have been seeing all that in the game. Now, some might argue that the tree in the actual mythology may not have been physically present in Midgard, but then again, God of War was actually never known for its mythological accuracy. It always, when it was in Greece, it always mentioned that it was loosely based on the Greek mythology. Plus, it would kind of make some sense to have the tree in Midgard, since Midgard is in the middle of all the realms. Okay, now moving on to the story, which is the next topic in this review. In this game, Kratos left Greece behind and moved to Scandinavia, as we already mentioned. The story is heavily focused on the aftermath of the death of Kratos' wife, whom you never actually see, because literally the first event in the story is her cremation. The event was accompanied by music that it felt like they were trying to extract some sentiment out of the player, but I think they failed to do so, or at least they failed to do so with me, because I knew nothing about her and I had no reason to be sad about her death. I mean, I know for sure that I love Kratos, but I never knew his wife. Had they introduced his wife to me and made me like her a little bit before killing her, then they would succeed at making me very emotional. But unfortunately, I felt nothing for her. Some reviewers were saying that her death could have had a much bigger impact had they felt an actual connection to her, and I definitely agree with that, since the entire plot revolves around her last wish after she died. More than anything, this task, which is her last wish, felt like a chore. If she had been actually alive in the story and then she died at some point during the events, then it's more than likely that I would have had developed some kind of connection to her. And at that point, I would be more than willing to carry her ashes to wherever she wanted. But unfortunately, she was dead at the start of the game, and it felt like the plot was rushed, even though it had more than enough time to develop. The next thing that happens is when the stranger, or Balder, arrives at Kratos' house. I think he had been sent on a mission by Odin. I'm not sure, but I think Odin was the one who sent him to either kill or capture Faye. I'm not sure which. I'm not sure if he was sent to kill or capture her. But as the story progresses, you learn that he already knows that she is dead, yet continues to chase after Kratos and Boy, together with Thor's sons Magni and Modi, and he had no reason to keep pursuing them because his mission was already over at the beginning of the story. Following the Stranger event, the story progresses very slowly and is heavily focused on the dialogue between Kratos and Boy, which very quickly made me lose interest in following the story. They ran into a boar, tried to kill the boar, then tried to save the boar. Then the story quickly becomes a series of prolonged fetch quests that really put my patience to the test more than anything. One of these fetch quests was to get the Light of Elfheim, so Kratos and Boy ended up involved in a war between the Dark and Light Elves, but to my disappointment, their involvement led to no actual consequence. At that point, I realized again how bored I am. I really was bored all the way until Boy got sick and someone called the World Serpent. They never really showed who called the Serpent, but the pace picks up a bit at this point, and I had my hopes up. But unfortunately, Kratos again was sent for another fetch quest to Helheim, but first he had to go home and fetch his blades, which I think was the only exciting moment for me in this game, because actually seeing the blades reminded me of the older God of Wars. So he fetches the blades and goes to Helheim to fetch the Gatekeeper's heart, which happens to be just another troll with maybe just a few new tricks. And then he goes back to fetch Boy. And when Boy recovers, Kratos tells him that he is a god. Then Boy instantly sits on the throne of the god of assholes, only to screw up and go back to normal just as fast. Now, I think that was some really rushed character development. And while in Helheim, you've probably noticed a huge eagle-like creature perching in the distance, but the game completely fails to acknowledge its presence because nothing was mentioned about it. Anyway, I did some research on my own, and I think the creature's name is, I think the pronunciation is Reisvelger or Reisvelg. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's one of the giants, and it can cause wind to blow by flapping its wings. But the thing is, its presence in the game is contradictory, because if it is a giant, then Faye was not the last remaining giant other than the World Serpent, like the story said. The events then continue to be slow until the end of the game. However, there is one thing that I found really annoying. In the events surrounding Boy's sickness, which take place around halfway in the story, they showed Athena and Zeus, and Kratos got his blades back. At first, this really got me excited because I thought events might finally take a very interesting turn by a plot twist maybe that integrates Greek mythology into Norse. That of course never happened, and you can only imagine my disappointment. It felt like this game had a pattern of including big events with no actual consequence, and it really felt like they were just playing on nostalgia to sell a story that would otherwise have been bleak at best. They were kind of just like dangling Zeus and Athena in front of me, like, hey, remember those awesome characters that we created? Yeah, well, too bad you're never gonna see them or anything related to them again. By the time I got to the end of the story, I was so disappointed that the moment Boy was revealed to be Loki only felt to me as a final desperate attempt to spark my interest in the story. And it failed to do so because the story never had substance to begin with. And nothing can remedy that. Not even Thor's secret ending. By the way, if you haven't seen it, probably you should check it. But I think you already know about it. I can't believe that this was the story they've been working on all these years. People compare the story to the story of the Last of Us, and I understand where that is coming from, but saying that the story of God of War is just as good as that of The Last of Us is very wrong. The story and character development in The Last of Us was phenomenal, in my opinion. And it was also very immersive and captivating. The events, dialogue, and emotions in The Last of Us felt very genuine and had a very natural flow. While in this God of War, it's like Kratos is suffering from severe emotional constipation and is straining very hard to get some emotions out, which made the dialogue and emotions feel very pretentious and forced as a result of all this training. Let me give you an example of how a good story works. Both The Last of Us and God of War start with a death scene, with God of War obviously copying The Last of Us. Anyway, in The Last of Us, the game starts by introducing Sarah, Joel's daughter. She wakes up at night, the world was going crazy and no one knew what was going on. Her father, who at the time we didn't know he was going to be the main character, came rushing into the house as if someone was chasing him and asked Sarah if anyone had come into the house. At this moment, I had 100 questions going through my head. What the hell is going on? Is it a zombie apocalypse? Is it a riot? Is it maybe an invasion? Is it the army attacking? Is it a terrorist attack? The point is, I really wanted to know what was going on. While I was thinking of all that, their neighbor broke into the house and Joel tried to talk to him to make him stop. At the time, they thought he had lost his mind or something. Anyway, Joel had to kill him in front of Sarah, and she said that she had seen him and he was okay the morning of that day. Now, all of this was accompanied by dark, suspenseful music. If you go back and play the game, you would feel it. Then his brother, Joel's brother, arrives at their place, and they left in a hurry. And while in the car, you could look around and see everyone going crazy, and you would see a neighbor's house on fire, and you even see a couple of pedestrians calling for help, but Joel and his brother ignored them and kept going, while Sarah said they should have stopped to help. Now, this may seem like a cruel thing to do, or maybe for some players it might seem to be just a passing event, but it felt very real. Any real person in their place would have done the same thing, which really shows a bit of the dark side of humans. Then another car crashes into theirs, and Sarah and had her ankle twisted or her leg broken. I'm not sure, but she couldn't walk anymore. So Joel had to carry her and run. And he gave his gun to his brother and asked him to protect them, which also felt very real and human because, unlike Kratos, he didn't have superpowers. He was just a regular human being who wasn't strong enough to carry his daughter and fight at the same time. So it was very realistic. At this point, I was really rooting for them and hoping that all of them would make it. The next thing to happen is they got stopped by a soldier, and the soldier was hesitating to kill them, but he received orders to do it, and now the soldier and his commander knew nothing about them, about Joel and his daughter, and they were not their enemies or anything, but they had to put their humanity aside. And again, any real person in their place could possibly have done the same thing in that situation. And I'm very sure that the soldier was suffering, even though we did not see his face, because he was about to kill people he would have normally protected with his own life as a part of his duty. So he shot at them, and Joel tried to turn around to shield Sarah with his own body, but it didn't work. She got hit. Then Joel's brother arrived at the scene and killed the soldier. Then Joel rushed to Sarah and watched his daughter die in his own arms, and he couldn't do anything about it. He had just went through something that no parent should have to go through. At that point, I was genuinely sad and emotional there. I felt bad for the guy, for real. If that didn't make you sad, I don't know what else would. Now I'm getting sad again. So now that's I think that's how you tell a story. It's true that I didn't know Sarah for a long time, but I knew her long enough, or just long enough to actually like her. If you take what God of War did and apply it here, Sarah would be dead at the opening scene without telling you how she died or why, and I would have felt nothing for her. This was exactly what happened with Faye, which in my opinion was a clumsy blunder. The story had ended before it even started. Some people also say that this God of War had good character development and interactions. I mean, what the hell are you talking about? Let's go back a bit and talk about The Last of Us again. In The Last of Us, Joel was just a regular guy living with his daughter, and then she died and he had to get over her loss, although he couldn't do it completely, and I think that's the reason he tried to keep his distance from Ellie. By the way, Ellie was bitten and was supposed to get sick, but she didn't for some reason, which is the second story element other than the opening death scene I just talked about that God of War copied from The Last of Us, seeing that boy was or also had some kind of problem inside him, just like Ellie did. Anyway, as they went further into their journey, they got attached to each other, trusted each other, and Joel started seeing her as his own daughter. Their bond grew slowly but surely, and at the end, he would kill anyone to protect her. Even though at the beginning of the story he was ready to leave her behind as soon as he finished his mission. The Last of Us characters were also more diverse. You play as Joel, and you're joined by that lady at the beginning of the game. I forgot her name. And then you're joined by Ellie. Then the lady dies, and then at some point there is that guy, Joel's friend. I forgot his name. Who they found in that town with all the traps and things. And then there is the black guy and his kid, also joined for a while, and they also die. And you also find Joel's brother again with his wife towards the end of the game. And you even play as Ellie for a bit. That actually, there's nothing like that in God of War. And by the way, Ellie also hunted a deer with her bow. And yes, I'm referring to Boy and his bow trying to hunt a deer. This is the third story element copied by God of War, and there's probably even more. Anyone who says that Kratos had no depth in the previous titles, or he was just an angry, violent jackass and that's it, doesn't know anything about him. It's true that he was full of blind ambition at first, but that changed very quickly after he killed his family. He spent many years feeling guilty about it and having nightmares because he had conscience. And throughout his journey, you would often hear him say, "By the gods, what have I become?" or "By the gods, what have I done?" which not only showed remorse but also self-loathing, and that he still had faith in the gods until until they betrayed him. And he grew vengeful after the gods tricked him and told him that they were going to relieve him of his nightmares, and that and his desire for revenge became even stronger after Zeus killed him. But and even at that point, he wasn't out of humanity. He always showed his concern to Sparta and Spartans, and he also showed guilt after he killed Athena. And there was another very important side to his personality that people often tend to overlook, and that side is that he had a very strong determination to achieve his goals, even if it cost him his life. So, for example, when the Furies in Ascension tried to force him to return to Ares, he said, "Death first." And God of War 2, when Zeus was about to kill him, Zeus ordered him to submit, and he said, "I would rather die." And that simply shows a massive amount of determination. He definitely wasn't angry when he said that. And he ended up killing the other gods only because they chose to stand between him and Zeus, not because he was angry at them, because he definitely did not go to Olympus and start chasing after the gods. They stood in his way. And this can also be a valuable life lesson, I think, if you think about it. But not the killing part, but I mean, never letting any difficulties stop you from achieving what you want. And by the way, I think that Kratos killed a bit too many gods in God of War 3. I thought they should have saved some for a sequel, especially Poseidon and Hades, because those guys were Zeus's brothers and main gods in Greek mythology, and I think they shouldn't have gone down so easily. Not to mention that there were many other gods and titans that weren't even mentioned in the games. Um, anyway, the interactions between Kratos and Boy felt very pretentious, as I already mentioned. It seemed to me that they tried to make a meaningful father and son interaction, but it ended up being very stereotypical and predictable. I, for one, and I'm sure all of you, knew from the beginning that Kratos and Boy would have issues, but eventually they would kiss and make up at the end, which was exactly what happened. The thing I did not expect was the million times he called Boy Boy. In fact, Kratos was in my opinion, he was a much better father for Calliope or even Pandora, even though he didn't know her for a long time. He was very protective of her, even more than he was for Boy. Um, I think he did everything he could not to lose her until Zeus made fun of his family at the end of the game. And if you remember, in God of War 3, he snapped Hera's neck just because she called Pandora a whore. And in the new God of War, when Baldur stabbed Boy in the shoulder, Kratos did absolutely nothing, which was very surprising to me because the Kratos I know would have torn Baldur's head off with his bare hands. Are you trying to tell me that the man who put an end to the Olympian gods found Freya's magic too difficult to overcome? The same man who killed Ares, Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus? Freya's magic was stronger than these guys? I think that's an insult to the trilogy coming from a mediocre game heavily based on the trilogy. And the fact that it is heavily based on the trilogy and not loosely based on it, as they would like you to believe, becomes clear when you realize that you would not truly appreciate the change in Kratos' character if this was the first time you're introduced to the game. And honestly speaking, I don't know why they had to change his character. He had extreme rage, but he wasn't crazy. It was, in my opinion, it was his extreme rage that made him special, because he's the god of war, not the god of peace or the god of wisdom, like right now. And I think now that he's calm, like everyone else, what makes him special and unique? I think nothing does. He's just another regular video game character. And in fact, in this game, Mimir was much more unique and had a lot better character than Kratos did. He had a lot of knowledge to share, and you could feel his anger and hate towards Odin. And he was very funny sometimes. And by the way, speaking of Kratos' character, he told Boy many stories while they were moving around, but I think all of them were useless. I think it would have been much better if he told Boy a story about his sister, Calliope, and his first family. But it feels like they created this game as if the first family never existed. I think if he told stories like that, then we would all relate to these stories much better. I think that's all I have to say about the story. So now let's move on and talk about the gameplay. The first thing that you notice right off the bat is the new camera. The previous God of War games had a fixed camera that gave the game a cinematic quality and truly let the player appreciate the beauty of the scenery and the scale of the battles. And the new camera, however, is so zoomed in that your visual field is very restricted to what's directly in front of you. In my opinion, this had a very bad impact on gameplay, especially on fighting. And I think that this kind of camera is suitable for Uncharted and The Last of Us because it was built for third-person shooters in the first place. But it simply isn't right for a game like God of War unless you're planning to play third-person shooter with your axe throughout the entire game. So most of the time you can only see enemies that are directly in front of you, but in the middle of a battle, you will almost always have one or at least one or multiple enemies behind you, or to your side, and you won't be able to see either because of how close the camera is. So instead of putting 100% of my focus on the actual fight like in the previous games, I actually ended up losing focus on the battle and focusing instead on turning the camera to face enemies because you can't block from all directions in this game, unlike the other games. I think it would be great if they fixed this issue in the future or included an optional zoomed out or classic mode in the following titles. My second issue with gameplay is how weak Kratos feels. Kratos, the great god of war, gets his ass handed to him by everyone, even Draugrs, provided that they are 2 or 3 levels higher than he is. This is true, especially on the higher difficulties. Baldur beat the shit out of Kratos, and he's not even one of the strongest gods in Norse mythology. There are countless enemies who can kill Kratos with one hit only, and if you've played the game, you know I'm not exaggerating. This only shows that being a god is absolutely meaningless in this game. Also, finishers do not feel brutal at all. You would never see a moment that would make you say, "Damn, only Kratos could do that." And this game never made me feel powerful, not even once. He felt just like a regular old guy fighting enemies that are just as strong or maybe stronger than he is, and they could kick his ass any second. So, and I think feeling like a powerful, unstoppable badass is the heart and soul of God of War, and this game just did not have it. It just carries the same name, and that's it. I think feeling powerful is why the franchise started in the first place. There are some people who think Kratos feels weak because he's old or because he's holding back in front of Boy. But on the other hand, if you look at Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, those guys were thousands of years old. They were in the Great War against the Titans. They were so much older and so much more powerful than this Kratos. And I don't really think that Kratos is the type to hold back in a fight anyway. So what you got in this game was Kratos really doing his best. Like, he was not holding back at all. And we all know that this was not the best he could do. But apparently the game developers thought so. So probably they have no idea what Kratos can do. So I think maybe it's time to get new developers. Anyway, Kratos did not, or I think he did not hold back in front of Pandora, and she was like a daughter to him. And I don't think he held back in front of Boy either. Um, his weakness in this game gave me an overwhelming feeling of frustration throughout the game, and it's as if this game was designed to force you to play defensively, simply because you'll get your ass kicked over and over if you play offensively. It forces you to purchase and upgrade equipment to compensate for Kratos' weakness. And I really think that Kratos is not the type of character that should rely on equipment. He killed everyone who faced him before this game shirtless. But here, you're forced to rely on equipment and upgrades, or else you would suffer a great deal. It's like they're telling you that your skill doesn't matter and that you'll get your ass kicked no matter how skilled you are. So you better buy those armors and upgrades if you want to finish the game. So anyway, I was forced to play defensively, and I spent a lot of fights throwing and recalling the axe until I won, because I didn't want to lose in one hit. I felt like I was fighting with a tomahawk. Kinda. I was even forced a few times to run away from enemies to recover. Imagine Kratos running away. This game was not strategic at all. The previous titles had a lot more room for strategy and skill, especially on higher difficulties. And again, you're more than welcome to check out my other videos if you want to see what I'm talking about for yourself. The only strategic things you could do in the new God of War were striking an enemy against a wall, or making them fall off a ledge, and both of these felt more like cheap tricks than actual skill and strategy. And I've also seen the video when the developer said, "Oh, you can throw the axe at one enemy and to freeze them and punch the other," which was kind of like a brilliant strategy that doesn't work when there are 20 enemies chasing after you. Now, let's talk a bit about Boy in combat. I actually like having Boy participate in battles, but I find implying that if it weren't for Boy, then Kratos couldn't have done certain things insulting to God of War's legacy. For example, did they really believe that Kratos couldn't be able to, or wouldn't be able to kill revenants on his own? Do they even know Kratos? If Kratos is good at something, it's finding a way to do what he wants. And he found a way to kill Hermes, who was the fastest being in the Greek world. Are you trying to tell me that revenants are faster than Hermes? I think this notion alone is insulting. And another example is when they get to a point in gameplay when Kratos needs Boy's help to open a door or climb something. Are you fucking kidding me? Kratos, a god who can shape the world to suit him, needs help from a kid? These examples only show how forced Boy's role is. I think a more fitting role for Boy would have been for him to follow Kratos' lead, watch, and be amazed with what Kratos can do, and that's it. And now we're still talking about the combats, and there are a few more things I'd like to mention about it. And one of those things is that there is a lack of variability of weapons in this game, and even though they'd like you to think that the Leviathan axe is unique, the fact that it functions just like Thor's hammer and made by the same guys who made Thor's hammer makes the Leviathan axe less unique, because the more of something there is, the less unique it is. So anyway, another thing about the combat is activating the Spartan Rage would simply turn the game into a boxing match which was very disappointing to me because I expected Kratos to do some crazy combos with his weapons. And another thing was the lack of quick time events, and which would have been fun to include in the game, but because there were no quick time events, the game was less enjoyable and less interactive. And not to mention the lack of platforming, because everything is done for the player with a single button press. So I don't know. It felt to me more like a movie, and um, just doesn't feel like a game anymore. And at the same time, the menu system and action RPG elements were overcomplicated and full of text about equipment, abilities, and a million combos and items that I honestly did not bother to read, because no one has time to read all that text. I mean, it's a game, not a book, and even if I had extra time, I'd rather invest it doing something more useful. And plus, even though it included these RPG elements, they were not as good as an actual RPG. So I think it turned out to be a sloppy hybrid. And what's the deal with that thing that looks like orange juice that comes out of every enemy you kill? The the God of War was probably the bloodiest game out there. Is it now shy all of a sudden to show blood? I think it just feels like they're apologizing for what they have done in the previous games. And when this game came out, everyone was praising how brutal and visceral the combat was. I mean, what do they mean visceral? I mean, what part of it was visceral? I mean, I certainly did not see the any viscera anywhere in this game. Speaking of enemies, why is every enemy a reskin? I mean, even trolls are reskins. I don't know if they lost their creativity or they're just lazy. And I also have to mention the side quests, which distract you from your main quest and are more frustrating than fun, especially that after going through the trouble of finishing the objectives, you get rewarded with items that you just dump into oblivion, along with all the hundreds of useless items you get throughout the journey. And by the way, how does someone learn skills by opening coffins? Does he just remember that he's able to do those skills after getting his hands on those coin purses? I just hope he finds one that reminds him how to jump, because I miss jumping. Um, so anyway, the puzzles also the puzzles in this game had a single pattern, and once you get used to it, all the puzzles become repetitive. And I think this is the least challenging God of War in terms of puzzles. And what the hell happens to God of War's epic music? God of War was known for epic music that made the game feel a lot more cinematic. The music was so good that it instantly got me hooked to the series, and this game was almost silent from start to finish, even during battles. So, I think I really said all I wanted to say about the game. So, in conclusion, I want to say that I finished playing the game about 6 months ago. But unlike the other God of War games, I finished this one only once, and I can honestly say that I've never had an urge to play it again, simply because to me it had nothing enjoyable or memorable that I really wanted to revisit. So even though the game had the new game plus feature included during the last couple of months, that wasn't a good enough reason for me to to go back and play it because it simply had nothing else to offer to me. So I want to say that I'm especially disappointed because I pre-ordered the Stonemason edition because I had really high hopes for this God of War, but I was disappointed, and it was really hard for me to point out all the flaws in this game since the God of War series is literally my all-time favorite, and ironically, my favorite out of the series is God of War 2, which was directed by Cory Barlog himself, who also directed this one. And I loved God of War 2 because it was also a major change in the direction and tone of the game, and and also because of the awesome new mechanics introduced into it. And at the same time, the game did not sacrifice its originality and unique identity to become a hybrid of other games like this one did, and that's why God of War 2 was my favorite and still my favorite. And speaking of Cory Barlog, what I think was a mistake that he did was that I think he got his personal life involved in the game. He said he became a father since the last game came out, and I think he wanted to convey the challenges of parenting through the game. But in doing so, he overlooked that not all players and fans of the game are parents, or even if they were, not all parents would want to maybe have a bit of time to rest from parenting to play a game about parenting. So by making that decision regarding the change in both character and gameplay, he alienated his original fan base in pursuit of, I don't know, maybe creating a different fan base. So many original fans, myself included, feel alienated and abandoned because of the change. I certainly do not appreciate this, and I think there are a lot of fans who agree with me. And furthermore, God of War should have been a trendsetter and an example for other games to follow, but instead it ended up becoming a trend follower. So I think it offered nothing that other games did not already offer, and I wanted to play the God of War I loved, not the Last of Us beta or a second-rate action RPG. So if this had been my first time being introduced to the series, I'm sure I wouldn't buy any subsequent releases because it lacked the originality and memorability and that the previous games had, and it had no replayability value, and this channel wouldn't have existed in the first place. Finally, I'd like to mention a couple of things. First, when this game first came out, there was a lot of hype and a lot of dishonest game reviews, and I can only see a few reasons for that. It's either people actually loved this game, which I honestly don't see why, or they were sponsored to do it, or I think they were misled by Sony's marketing, or I think some of them were disappointed in the game, but I think they remained in denial. And I think a lot of people who bought this game had buyer's remorse, and I saw that on multiple occasions on the internet. In my opinion, it's definitely not a 10 out of 10 game, and I think it's nowhere close to 9 either. I think it's a 7 or a 7.5 at best. And as I just said, a lot of people changed their mind about this game, but it took them a while to do so. It's kind of like when you date someone for the first time and you're excited about it, and after some time you ask yourself, why am I still dating them? And the second and last thing I wanted to say was to remind you that this game is a product and I'm an already existing consumer, and since the product changed so much without considering how it would affect me or other consumers, then you and I have every right to say what we think about this change, be it positive or negative, because products should be tailored to what consumers want. The audience and their support was the reason the franchise succeeded in the first place. So, this is the end of the review. Let me know if you liked it or not in the comment section. You're welcome to subscribe to the channel, and you're welcome to point out anything you agree or disagree with. You can also add me on PSN. My ID is Bloody Spartan 87. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.